why'd you leave? Why did you leave me?
I'm sorry, son.
Snow hammers the city. Alexander Carter, successful yet lonely, the kind of man who could be any quiet neighbor, finishes dinner when a shivering boy slips in, leaves a folded paper, and vanishes into the storm. Inside is a crayon drawing, a suited man holding a child's hand, a face like Alexander's. Old regrets rise. If the boy is searching for his father, what truth waits in the snow? The storm pressed against the glass like a living thing, rattling the gold-trimmed windows of the restaurant where heat and music held the night at bay. Alexander Carter sat alone at his table in a corner, a half-drunk espresso cooling beside the leather-bound check. He had closed a deal over seared halibut and polite laughter, shook the right hands, said the right words. Yet the applause in his head was already fading, leaving only the hum of the ventilation and a faint ache beneath his ribs. He loosened his red tie, the silk darkened by melted snow. In the mirrored wall he caught his reflection. Side-swept dark hair with a few gray threads, square jaw, deep-set eyes that used to spark when life felt simpler. The storm flashed a white hand across the glass, and when the light dimmed, he noticed movement on the far side of the dining room. A boy, small and thin, slipping between tables the way a sparrow threads a hedge. Sneakers wet, hoodie thin, cheeks bright with cold. He was out of place here, yet he moved with purpose, his gaze hunting across suits and sequins until it landed on Alexander. The maitre d' started toward him, whispering an apology to a startled couple, but the boy quickened, weaving past a server with a tray of oysters. He stopped at Alexander's table. The world narrowed. Candlelight, silverware, a small hand tremoring from the cold, placing a folded piece of paper beside the espresso. The boy's breath steamed. His lips parted like he might speak, then closed. His eyes, large and dark, held a question he didn't ask. "Hey," Alexander said, gentle, not quite rising from his chair. "Are you all right?" The boy glanced toward the door. The maitre d' was closing in. The boy shook his head once, as if against something only he could hear. Then he flashed a look at the folded paper, a plea without words. His fingers pushed it a little closer to Alexander, and he stepped back. "Sir," the maitre d' said to Alexander, contrite and tight. "I'm terribly sorry. We'll escort him out." Alexander raised a hand. "Let him go." The words left his mouth before he could think. The boy didn't wait for permission. He pivoted and sprinted, one arm hugging his chest, the other brushing chairs as he flew toward the revolving door. A rush of cold crashed through the restaurant as he slipped into the storm and vanished into the white. The maitre d' sighed. "These storms bring them in from the street. We try to help, but—" His voice flattened. "Shall I remove the child? Note?" Alexander shook his head. "No." He slid the paper into his palm. The stalk was soft, worn thin in the center, creased with care. A faint waxy scent clung to it, a hint of crayon he could smell even over lemon and butter. Along the edge, where the fold had split, a small vein of color showed. Blue or black, he couldn't tell. "Do you know him, sir?" A waitress had drifted closer, concern softening her features. "He looked right at you." "I don't," Alexander said. The answer felt unsteady. He knew who he wanted. The check lay untouched, his pen motionless. He should sign, return to the insulated cocoon of his town car, check messages, send a thank you. Instead, he lifted the paper, surprised by how heavy it felt. The candle flame wavered, brightening the crease. He pulled a breath through his nose, steadying the tremor in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. Outside, the wind keened down the avenue. The door thumped open and shut with each arrival, a tiny tide of noise and winter air. Alexander stood, slid the paper into his coat, and placed the black card on the tray. He added a tip that would make the owner blink, then reached for his overcoat. At the host stand, the maitre d' murmured apologies that didn't stick. The hallway smelled of pine cleaner and wet wool. When Alexander pushed through the revolving door, the storm wrapped him in its arms, clinging and loud. His driver jogged from the curb, holding an umbrella that buckled under the wind. "Sir, the car's warm," the driver said. "Rough night for a walk?" Alexander nodded, but didn't move. Shapes went in and out of the snow haze, taxis, scarves, a couple clutching each other as they ran for shelter. Across the street, a small figure darted near a bus stop, then was gone, swallowed by white. He slid a gloved finger under the fold of the paper in his pocket and paused. Not here, not under the hard lights and the eyes of the city. He closed his hand around the note and felt its bend against his palm, a small hinge holding something closed, a hinge he already knew he would open. "Home," he said to the driver, though the word sounded like a place he hadn't found yet. The storm was unrelenting, snow slanting against the tall windows of the Blackstone restaurant as Alexander Carter sat in silence. His meal lay half-eaten, untouched for too long, his thoughts snagged on the fleeting image of the boy darting into the blizzard. In his hand was the folded paper. Its edges were damp from the boy's grip, the faint imprint of crayon bleeding slightly into the fibers. Slowly, Alexander opened it. A child's drawing emerged, uneven lines and bright colors trembling with effort. A man in a dark suit stood tall, holding the hand of a boy. The figure's squared jaw, the set of his shoulders, even the neatly parted hair, it was unmistakable. The suited man looked exactly like Alexander himself. Beneath the drawing, written in blocky, uncertain letters, were words that pierced deeper than any corporate betrayal. "Please find my daddy. My mommy cries every night." Alexander's breath caught. He stared longer than he realized, his pulse a hammer in his ears. The boy hadn't asked for food, hadn't begged for money. He'd asked for something Alexander had locked away for decades. Family. The folded page trembled in his hands. He thought of a night long ago, a cramped apartment washed in golden lamplight, and a woman's voice he had once cherished. Elena, the one he'd left behind when his family pressed him to choose ambition over love. For years, he'd told himself she had moved on, married someone else, built a life without him. Yet here, in a restaurant filled with polished silver and quiet music, a boy who could have been her son had drawn him with uncanny precision. Alexander leaned back in the leather chair, fingers tight around the note. Regret pressed into his chest like a vice. Had he condemned not only himself to loneliness, but also a child to longing? His phone buzzed softly on the table. His assistant's name flashed across the screen. He ignored it. For the first time in years, business felt irrelevant. All that mattered was the fragile piece of paper in his hand and the truth it hinted at. He slipped the drawing carefully into his inner jacket pocket, as if it were too precious to crease further. Rising abruptly, he left a stack of bills on the table and strode toward the door. Outside, snowflakes stung his face. The street was nearly deserted, the boy nowhere in sight. Alexander scanned the sidewalk, the shadows of doorways, but the storm had already swallowed him. Back in his waiting car, he unfolded the drawing again under the dome light. His driver glanced in the mirror, puzzled at his silence. Alexander whispered, almost to himself, "Who are you?" The boy's uneven handwriting seemed to answer, echoing in the stillness, "Please find my daddy." Alexander exhaled, long and unsteady. He pulled out his phone at last and dialed. When his assistant's voice answered, brisk and professional, Alexander's tone was unlike anything she'd heard before, urgent, almost pleading. "There was a boy," he said. 9, maybe 10. He was at Blackstone tonight. Find out who he is, where he lives, everything." "Yes, sir," she replied, hesitating at his intensity. Alexander hung up without another word. He closed his eyes, leaning back as the car moved through the snow. The note lay open in his lap. And, for the first time in years, the invincible CEO felt small, vulnerable, and deeply afraid of the truth waiting in the storm. The car glided through the storm, its headlights carving tunnels of light through the curtain of snow. Inside, the silence was heavy. Alexander sat back against the leather seat, the folded drawing open on his lap. The crayons bled faint color under the dome light, the child's scrawl digging deeper into him with each glance. "Please, find my daddy. My mommy cries every night." His driver glanced up in the mirror. "Home, sir?" Alexander nodded, but his voice was tight. "Yes, straight home." The word home tasted bitter. His penthouse wasn't home. It was polished stone and glass, quiet as a mausoleum, the kind of place where the echo of footsteps reminded him how empty it was. He touched the page again. The child's drawing wasn't random. It was deliberate. The man in the suit, the man holding the boy's hand, wasn't just a figure. It was him. Square jaw, side-swept hair. The very stance Elena used to tease him about when he was too serious. The name hit him like a spark in the dark. Elena. He closed his eyes and the years peeled back. He could almost hear her voice again, soft yet unyielding. "Love isn't about convenience, Alexander. It's about staying." But he hadn't stayed. He had left, bowing to his family's pressure, chasing a legacy that had left him hollow. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it, pressing the bridge of his nose as guilt surged. The city outside blurred past. Shadows of storefronts, old churches, darkened windows. Each one a reminder of the life he had built on sacrifice. When the car finally pulled up to his high-rise, the doorman hurried forward, umbrella raised. Alexander stepped out, the drawing clutched inside his coat, and moved quickly through the lobby without a word. Inside his penthouse, the silence was deafening. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out on a city buried in snow, lights dimmed by the storm. He placed the drawing on the marble counter, staring at it under the soft glow of pendant lamps. He poured himself a glass of scotch, but the taste was sharp, wrong. He set it down untouched and leaned on the counter, shoulders heavy. Sleep felt impossible. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed. His assistant answered groggily. "Sir, I need you to find that boy," Alexander said, his tone urgent. "The one from Blackstone tonight. 9 years old, dark hair, thin. He left me this." He hesitated, then added, "Find out his name, his mother's name, where they live." A pause. "Do you know them, sir?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Just find them." When the call ended, Alexander picked up the drawing again. His thumb brushed over the crayon figure of the suited man, its crooked smile both innocent and damning. Snow whipped against the glass, rattling faintly, like the city itself was restless. And so was he. He couldn't shake the memory of Elena, her laughter, her anger, her tears the night he left. As the storm deepened, Alexander stood alone by the window, the city at his feet, regret clawing its way back to life. Somewhere out there, a boy was searching for his father, and deep down, Alexander feared he already knew the truth. The folded drawing trembled slightly in his hand. He whispered into the silence, "What if he's mine?" The storm gave no answer. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the city glazed in ice and muffled under drifts of white. Alexander hadn't slept much. The crayon drawing still sat on his nightstand, its colors catching faint morning light. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy's face, pale and shivering, the urgency in his gaze. By noon, Alexander was back at Blackstone. The restaurant, stripped of its evening glamour, smelled faintly of bleach and brewed coffee. Staff moved quietly, polishing silver and setting tables for the lunch crowd. "Mr. Carter," the maitre d' said, startled to see him so early. "We weren't expecting—" "I need to ask about the boy," Alexander interrupted gently. "The one who slipped in last night." A waitress drying glasses froze, her eyes flicking nervously. She set the glass down and stepped closer. "You mean Leo?" she said softly. The name struck Alexander like a pulse. "Leo?" she nodded. "He doesn't come inside much. Usually lingers out front or in the alley. We give him leftovers when we can." Her voice lowered. "He's polite, quiet, always sketching." Alexander slid the drawing from his coat pocket, laying it on the polished bar. "Did he make this?" The waitress's eyes softened. "Yes, he draws that man all the time, over and over." The maitre d' frowned. "He told someone once." He hesitated. "What did he say?" Alexander pressed, his voice quiet but firm. The maitre d' sighed. "That he was drawing his dad. Said it helps him remember, so he can find him one day." Alexander's throat tightened. He traced the edge of the drawing with his thumb, the waxy paper suddenly heavier than stone. From the kitchen, Henry Bellamy, the restaurant's owner, emerged. His white beard and kind eyes contrasted with the polished suits around him. "Mr. Carter," he greeted warmly. "Is something wrong?" Alexander held the drawing up. "This boy, you've seen him before?" Henry's smile faltered. "Yes, several times. Poor kid never begs, never steals, just watches and draws. Same man every time." He studied Alexander closely, his brow furrowing. "Why does that picture look so much like you?" The question lingered in the air, sharp and undeniable. Alexander slid the drawing back into his pocket, his heartbeat loud in his ears. "Do you know where he lives?" Alexander asked quietly. Henry shook his head. "Not exactly, but I've seen him run toward the old district down near Renfield Street. That part of town doesn't get many visitors anymore." Renfield Street. Alexander hadn't set foot there in decades. A place full of rusted fences, sagging porches, and memories he had buried under the weight of ambition. He left the restaurant quickly, coat collar pulled high against the chill air. As he stepped into the street, the name Leo echoed in his mind. A boy who drew him again and again, a boy searching for his father, and somewhere in the hollow of his chest regret burned hotter, whispering of a truth he could no longer ignore. Renfield Street was a place Alexander Carter had carefully erased from his memory. Yet, as his car slowed along the cracked asphalt, the ghosts of his past rose like shadows. The neighborhood looked as if the storm had passed over it without mercy. Boarded windows, fences leaning on rusted nails, and children's bicycles half buried in snow. "Stop here," Alexander told his driver. The sedan eased to a halt before a faded green duplex with peeling trim. A tricycle leaned against the porch, one wheel bent, its bright red paint chipped away. The sight caught Alexander in the chest. He remembered a different tricycle, years ago, outside a modest house where Elena used to live. Elena. Her name was a wound that had never healed. He stepped out, his polished shoes sinking into the slush, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt out of place. Too crisp, too clean, standing like a stranger in a life he once belonged to. Across the street, a curtain twitched. Then an elderly woman emerged from a nearby porch, bundled in a heavy coat. She squinted, then her eyes widened. "Alexander Carter?" He froze. "Mrs. Delaney?" She nodded, her breath clouding in the cold air. "Lord, it's been a lifetime. What brings you back here?" "I need to ask about someone," Alexander said, stepping closer. His voice carried both urgency and hesitation. "Elena, does she still live here?" Mrs. Delaney's expression shifted, her arms folding tightly. "She never left. Took care of her mother until she passed. She works now, keeps to herself." A pause. Then, softer. "Life hasn't been easy." Alexander swallowed hard. "Is she married?" "No." Mrs. Delaney's gaze was steady. "Never was. She has a son. His name's Leo. Sweet boy, quiet, smart, like his mama." The name struck again, like a bell ringing through his bones. "Leo?" Mrs. Delaney glanced toward the duplex. "Elena never spoke of his father, but I've seen the boy draw. Men in suits, tall with square jaws. Once he showed me a picture and said, 'This is my dad. I'm going to find him.'" Alexander's throat tightened. his breath shallow. He looked at the small sneakers by the front step, the shadow moving behind the curtain, and knew with a certainty that made his chest ache. This boy wasn't just searching for a father, he was searching for him. The weight of regret pressed down heavier than the snow. He had left Elena to face life alone, and in his absence she had raised a son who might be his own. Mrs. Delaney's eyes softened, though her words carried quiet reproach. She doesn't talk about you anymore. She let go of that chapter a long time ago. Alexander looked again at the duplex, his voice low. Maybe the chapter never let go of me. Snowflakes drifted silently, settling on the bent tricycle, the worn steps, and the man who suddenly realized the life he abandoned had not stayed buried. It had grown into a boy with his eyes. The cold air clung to Alexander as he lingered on the sidewalk, staring at the duplex. Every detail of the place tugged at memories. Faded curtains, chipped railings, the faint sound of a child's laughter that once echoed through Elena's world. He hadn't seen her in years, but Mrs. Delaney's words kept circling in his mind. She has a son. His name's Leo. Alexander pressed his hand against the folded drawing in his coat. The boy had sketched him, again and again. It wasn't a coincidence. The truth pressed harder with every breath. Leo might be his child. Mrs. Delaney's voice softened. He draws you all the time, you know, or someone who looks an awful lot like you. Alexander turned, his throat tight. Does Elena ever speak of me? The older woman's eyes hardened with quiet honesty. Not once. She carried her pain alone. And that boy, he carries questions she's never answered. Her words sliced deeper than any accusation. He pictured Elena, years younger, standing at a doorway, eyes shining with betrayal as he left. He had told himself she would move on, find someone worthy, but she hadn't. She had faced the years alone, raising a child in silence. Snow crunched on the porch as Mrs. Delaney stepped closer. She shielded him from the truth, maybe to protect him, maybe to protect herself. But that boy, he knows something's missing. Alexander's chest tightened. Does he know about me? Mrs. Delaney hesitated. He knows his father wasn't there. That's enough to shape a boy's heart. Alexander exhaled, his breath steaming in the air. Regret clawed at him with sharp fingers. He had built an empire, yet left a child to wonder. He glanced again at the duplex. In the dim light of the window, he thought he saw a small shadow move past the curtain. A boy's outline, slight shoulders, restless steps. His heart twisted. For years, Alexander had believed wealth and success would fill the void left by the past. But standing here, the truth was brutal. No fortune could mend the years of absence. He whispered under his breath, Leo, what have I done to you? Mrs. Delaney studied him, her eyes kind but heavy with judgment. If you mean to step back into their lives, Mr. Carter, don't come with empty promises. That boy has lived without you this long. He doesn't need another disappointment. Alexander nodded slowly, her warning sinking deep. He had power in boardrooms, but here, on this forgotten street, all of that meant nothing. What mattered was a boy with crayon drawings and unanswered questions. He turned back toward his car, each step weighted with old guilt and new truth. Inside, he pulled the drawing from his coat, smoothing its creases as though it were fragile glass. The suited man and the boy holding hands stared back at him, innocent and damning. Leo's words, written in shaky letters, echoed in his mind. Please find my daddy. My mommy cries every night. Alexander's hand trembled as he folded the note again. The storm outside had cleared, but inside, a storm was only beginning. Alexander returned to Renfield Street the following evening, his heart heavier with every step. The snow had hardened to ice, crunching beneath his shoes as he approached the modest apartment door Mrs. Delaney had pointed out. Light glowed faintly from inside, and voices, soft, domestic, filtered through the thin walls. He raised his hand to knock, hesitated, then finally rapped gently. Footsteps shuffled. The door creaked open a few inches, chain still fastened. Elena stood there. For a moment, time collapsed. She was older, her hair tied back in a loose bun, strands falling free around her face. Weariness sat in her eyes, but beneath it was the same quiet fire he remembered. "Alexander," she whispered, shock breaking through her composure. "Elena," he breathed, her name tasting both foreign and familiar. Her grip on the door tightened. "What are you doing here?" I had to see you." His voice faltered. "I think I met—" He stopped himself, glancing at the small shadow moving behind her. The chain rattled as she pressed the door nearly shut. "No, you don't get to be here. You don't get to speak his name." "Elena, please." "You left," she cut in, her voice sharp though trembling. "You chose your family's money over us. Do you think you can knock on my door after all these years and undo that?" Alexander's throat ached. I didn't know about him." Her eyes burned. "And what difference would it have made? Would you have stayed? Or would they have bought you off just the same?" He reached toward the doorframe, desperation in his voice. "Elena, I need to see him. Just once." Behind her, Alexander caught a glimpse, wide eyes peering curiously from the kitchen. A boy's face, soft but alert, features that mirrored his own in the ways that left him breathless. Leo. Elena noticed his glance and quickly shifted, blocking the view. "No." She pulled the door tighter, her voice a whisper heavy with years of pain. "You don't get to speak his name." The chain clicked shut, the door slamming softly in his face. Alexander stood motionless in the hallway. The sound of muted laughter drifted faintly from the apartment, and with it, the weight of all the years he had lost. He pressed a hand against the door, whispering into the silence, "I'm sorry." But the door didn't open again. He turned back down the dim stairwell, each step echoing like a verdict. Behind him, through a small gap in the curtain, a pair of curious eyes followed him, wide with questions only a boy could carry. The following evening, Alexander sat in his car across from Elena's apartment, the city's hum muffled under a thin layer of snow. He hadn't meant to linger there, but leaving felt impossible. The memory of her eyes, cold and guarded, still pierced him. Worse was the fleeting glimpse of the boy, Leo, whose face carried too much of his own to dismiss. Alexander's driver cleared his throat gently. "Sir, should I take you home?" "Not yet," Alexander replied, his gaze fixed on the building. His voice held a weight the driver dared not question. The hours stretched. Street lamps buzzed. Somewhere inside, a television flickered blue light against the curtains. Alexander's fingers tapped restlessly on the folded crayon drawing in his pocket. Just as he leaned back to finally leave, movement caught his eye. A small figure slipped quietly out to the side door of the building, careful not to let it slam. The boy. Leo padded through the snow, thin jacket zipped up tight, his breath puffing white in the cold. He glanced around, eyes sharp for someone who might be watching. Then, with quick determination, he crossed to Alexander's car. Before Alexander could react, the boy bent, slid something under the windshield wiper, and started back toward the building. "Wait," Alexander whispered, throwing open the door. His shoes crunched on ice. "Leo!" The boy froze for a moment, his small shoulders stiff, but instead of answering, he bolted back inside, the side door clicking shut behind him. Alexander turned back to the car, heart racing. He pulled the folded square from under the wiper and carefully opened it beneath the street lamp. The note was written in uneven, messy letters. "You used to love my mommy. Why did you stop?" The words blurred as Alexander's throat tightened. He leaned against the car, snow settling on his shoulders, eyes stinging. The boy knew. Somehow, Leo understood more than Elena was willing to admit. Alexander folded the paper slowly, pressing it against his chest. The question echoed in his mind, unrelenting. Why had he stopped? The truth was cruel. He hadn't stopped loving Elena at all. He had been forced to choose a world that demanded he abandon her. Now, years later, the cost of that choice stood in front of him, a boy searching for answers in the cold. The city was silent, save for the whisper of snow. Alexander climbed back into the car, his voice hoarse as he gave the only order he could think of. "Find out everything," he told his assistant over the phone, "about Elena, about Leo, about what happened after I left." He ended the call, staring at the child's note one last time. The letters wavered under the dim light, a plea sharp enough to cut through steel. "Why did you stop?" Alexander had no answer, not yet, but he knew he couldn't walk away again. Alexander's office at the top of the Carter Global was usually his fortress. Floor-to-ceiling glass, mahogany desk, silence broken only by the hum of the city far below. But that morning, the sanctuary felt like a prison. He sat at his desk, Elena's name scrawled across a notepad. Leo's folded notes laid out before him like evidence. His sister, Veronica, arrived without knocking. Impeccably dressed, her posture straight as steel, she stepped inside and closed the door softly. "You've been restless," she said, "visiting old neighborhoods, chasing ghosts?" Alexander didn't look up. "I'm chasing answers." He lifted Leo's crayon drawing. "Did you know about him?" Her gaze flickered, then steadied. "About what exactly?" "Leo," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "Elena's son. My son." Veronica sighed, setting her glass of sparkling water on the edge of his desk. "You don't want to go down this road." "I already have," Alexander snapped. He rose, anger cracking through his composure. "Tell me the truth, Veronica. Did the family push Elena away?" Her silence was answer enough. The corners of her mouth tightened. "We did what was necessary. You were young, reckless, ready to throw away your future. Father was adamant. Elena was not part of the plan." Alexander's chest heaved. "So you paid her to disappear." "She accepted," Veronica replied coldly, "for her own reasons, for survival. And yes, we made sure you never knew the full story." He stared at her, betrayal flooding his veins. "You lied to me." "You weren't ready to hear it," she said, her tone sharp but trembling at the edges. "And even now, knowing the truth, what will you do? Expose yourself? Ruin the company? Ruin Leo's life by dragging him into the spotlight?" Alexander's fists tightened. "He deserves to know who I am. He deserves a father who won't abandon him." For the first time, Veronica's mask cracked. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. She hesitated, then tossed it onto the desk. "You want truth? Fine, but once you open that, there's no going back." Alexander snatched it up, hands shaking. Inside was a single page, a paternity document, signed and sealed, with his name written in black ink. Leo was his. He sank into his chair, the weight of the paper pressing him down. Veronica's voice cut through the silence. "Let the past stay buried, Alex. If you dig it up, you'll destroy everything. Your career, this company, your future. Sometimes love has to die so survival can live." He lifted his eyes to hers, fury and resolve burning together. "You buried love. I won't bury my son." Veronica stiffened, but for a fleeting moment fear flickered in her gaze. She turned and left without another word, the click of her heels fading into the marble hallway. Alone again, Alexander stared at the paper. His entire life, his choices, his sacrifices, had led to this moment. And now, nothing mattered more than the boy who had drawn him in crayon, desperate for a father. The storm had returned that night, a bitter wind sweeping through the streets as Alexander's car rolled slowly down Renfield. He had no destination, only an instinct that kept him circling the neighborhood where Elena and Leo lived. His sister's warning echoed in his mind, but the truth in his hands, the paternity document, burned hotter than any threat. Then he saw him. Up ahead, Near the corner grocery, Leo trudged through the snow, a flimsy grocery bag clutched to his chest. The boy's hood barely held against the wind, his sneakers already soaked. Each step looked heavier than the last. Alexander tapped the window. "Stop the car!" He stepped out into the storm just as headlights swung around the corner. A sedan barreled too fast down the icy road, horn blaring as it fishtailed. "Leo!" Alexander shouted. The boy froze in the middle of the crosswalk, blinded by the lights. The grocery bag slipped from his arms, spilling cans that rolled wildly across the street. Without thinking, Alexander sprinted. His polished shoes slipped on ice, but adrenaline carried him forward. He reached Leo just as the car screeched closer, wrapping his arms around the boy and yanking him hard onto the curb. The car roared past, the driver cursing through a half-open window, then vanished into the storm. Alexander collapsed onto the snowbank, shielding Leo with his body. His heart thundered, breath ragged, arms trembling as he pulled the boy closer. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice breaking. Leo shook his head, his small hands gripping Alexander's coat with desperate strength. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, his eyes wide and wet. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm howled, but in the space between them there was only silence, a silence that felt fragile and sacred. Then Leo whispered, barely audible against the wind, "You feel like home." Alexander's throat tightened. The words, simple and unguarded, pierced deeper than any accusation. He cupped the boy's shoulders gently, looking into his wide, searching eyes. "Leo." He swallowed hard. "I've been looking for you." The boy blinked, his breath still shaky. His gaze dropped to the scattered groceries, then back up to Alexander. A hint of recognition flickered there, as if he'd always known, deep down. Alexander held him close again, the storm spinning around them, and for the first time in years, the emptiness inside him began to break. The man who once walked away from love had just pulled his son from the path of danger, and neither of them would ever forget it. The storm had eased by morning, but the memory of last night's near tragedy clung to Alexander like a second skin. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt Leo's small frame in his arms, heard that fragile whisper, "You feel like home." He knew he couldn't wait any longer. By late afternoon, he stood outside Elena's modest apartment once more. His hand hovered at the door before he finally knocked, firm and steady. The door opened just enough for her to see him. Her eyes widened, shock quickly hardening into anger. "You need to leave." "No," Alexander said, his voice breaking with urgency. "Not this time. I saved him last night, Elena. He nearly got hit by a car. He's safe. He's inside. But if I hadn't been there—" He shook his head, emotion raw in his throat. "I can't keep pretending he isn't mine." Her knuckles whitened on the doorframe. "You don't get to show up now and act like a father. You had your chance, Alexander. You left me to raise him alone." "I didn't know." His voice rose, then softened. "They kept it from me. My family. Veronica. They told me you walked away." Elena's expression cracked for a moment, pain flashing behind her eyes before she steadied herself again. "They paid me to disappear," she admitted bitterly. "Said you'd never choose me over them. Said you'd never survive the scandal." Her voice trembled. I thought you knew." Alexander staggered back as if struck. The air between them seemed to collapse. "All these years, I thought you left me." "I stayed for Leo," she said, her jaw trembling. "Every decision, every sacrifice, I made for him, not for me." He stepped closer, desperation in his gaze. "And what about me? Don't I get the chance to make it right?" She laughed bitterly, though her eyes brimmed with tears. "Do you know how many nights I watched him cry for a father he never had? How many times I had to tell him he was enough when I felt broken myself? You can't just walk back in and erase that." "I'm not asking to erase it," Alexander whispered, his voice raw. I'm asking for the chance to carry it with you, to show him that I won't walk away again." Elena's hands trembled on the door, her resolve wavering. Behind her, the sound of footsteps echoed softly, Leo's footsteps. Alexander's heart hammered. He could feel the boy's presence, close but unseen. "Elena," he said, his voice breaking. "He deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know me." Her lips pressed together, torn between fear and longing. She didn't answer. She simply closed her eyes, holding back tears, as if the weight of 10 years pressed all at once on her chest. Alexander stood there, breathing hard, waiting, refusing to leave. For the first time, he wasn't the man who let go. He was the man who stayed. The apartment was hushed, but tension pulsed through the walls like a heartbeat. Alexander's voice still lingered at the doorway, raw and unyielding. He deserves to know the truth. Then came the sound of movement. Small feet, a hesitant shuffle. Leo appeared from the narrow hallway, eyes wide, a coloring pencil still clutched in his hand. He looked from his mother's trembling face to the tall man standing at the door. "Mom," he whispered, his voice tight. "Is it true? Is he my dad?" Elena froze. The air seemed to drain from the room. Alexander's breath caught, his hands trembling at his sides. He dropped to one knee, trying to soften the distance between them. "Leo," he said gently. "I think I am." The boy's face twisted with confusion, pain, and hope all at once. He looked at his mother, searching for denial, for reassurance, but tears welled in her eyes and silence was her only answer. Leo's lip quivered. "All this time, you knew? And you didn't tell me?" His voice cracked, louder now, sharper. Elena reached out, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "You always said my dad was gone, that he didn't want me." His small fists clenched around the pencil. "But you lied. Leo," Elena choked. "I wanted to protect you." "From what?" His voice rose, his chest heaving. "From him? Or from me knowing the truth?" Alexander reached forward, but the boy flinched. "Don't," Leo whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I don't even know you." The words pierced deeper than any wound. Alexander's vision blurred, but he stayed kneeling, refusing to pull back. "You're right," he said softly. "You don't know me, but I want you to. I want to make up for every day I wasn't here." Leo's gaze wavered, torn between anger and aching hope. For a moment, his eyes looked just like Elena's had when she was young, brimming with questions the world had no answer for. Suddenly, the boy turned and bolted past his mother, the apartment door swinging open to the night. His small figure disappeared into the snow-laced street, his sobs echoing in the cold. "Leo!" Elena cried, racing after him. Alexander followed, his heart pounding, the storm of regret crashing louder than the wind outside. He caught sight of the boy stumbling down the block, tears streaking his face. Alexander ran, the cold biting his lungs, until he caught up. He dropped to his knees in the snow, his breath clouding in the icy air. "Leo, please," he begged, his voice breaking. "Don't run from me. I've already lost too much time." The boy stood trembling, his small shoulders shaking. He wiped at his eyes with the back of his sleeve, whispering words that shattered the silence. "I just wanted my daddy." The world tilted. Alexander's chest caved under the weight of those words. He reached out again, slower this time, his hand steady in the cold. "Then let me be him," he whispered. "Please." Snow drifted between them, fragile and weightless, as father and son faced the storm not outside, but inside their hearts. Snow dusted the street lamps, casting soft halos over the frozen block where Alexander knelt before his son. Leo's words, "I just wanted my daddy," still hung in the air, fragile and trembling. Alexander's throat tightened. He held his hand out, steady this time. "Leo, I can't undo the years I missed, but I can choose differently now. I can choose you." The boy's eyes searched his, uncertain. Behind them, Elena caught up, breathless, her face pale in the cold. She pulled her coat tighter, torn between anger and the ache of watching her son cry. "Leo," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Come here." But the boy didn't move. His gaze flicked between his mother's tear-streaked face and the man kneeling in the snow. "Why should I believe you?" he asked Alexander, his voice raw. "You'll just leave again." "I won't," Alexander said firmly, his hand still outstretched. "Not this time, not ever. They forced me away before, but I see the truth now, and I swear to you, I will never walk away again." Elena's eyes filled. "Words are easy, Alex. Do you know how many promises I've had to break just to keep food on the table?" Alexander stood slowly, turning to her, his breath sharp in the icy air. "Then let me carry some of that weight now. Let me carry both of you. Not as charity, not as guilt, but because I should have been here all along." Elena shook her head, torn between anger and longing. "How can I trust you? How can he?" Alexander reached into his coat and pulled out the folded crayon drawing, the man in the suit holding the boy's hand. He crouched again, showing it to Leo. "You drew this because you believed he existed, that one day he would come for you. I'm here now. I'm him. If you'll let me be." Leo's small fingers brushed the paper, his lips trembling. He looked up at Alexander, and for the first time his eyes softened. Elena watched the moment, her defenses weakening. The sincerity in Alexander's voice, the way Leo leaned toward him, it was something she couldn't deny. Still, she whispered, "If you break him, Alex, if you break him, it'll destroy us both." Alexander's eyes glistened. "Then I'll spend every day proving I won't." Snow fell in slow, steady flakes, settling over them like a fragile promise. For the first time, the distance between them began to close, not erased, but bridged by choice, by love, and by the hope of a second chance. The storm eased into silence that night, leaving the city blanketed in white. Inside Elena's apartment, the air was warm for the first time in years. A single lamp glowed over the small wooden table where 3 places had been set. Plates mismatched, chairs uneven, yet it felt whole in a way Alexander's penthouse never had. Leo sat at the table, chin propped on his hands, eyes darting between his mother and the man who had once been a stranger but now sat across from him. Alexander poured water into a glass, his movements careful, reverent, as though each small act mattered. "Mom makes the best stew," Leo said softly, almost shy. Alexander smiled, his deep blue eyes glistening. "Then I'm the luckiest man alive tonight." Elena watched them, her guard still present but lowered. She stirred the pot, her hands steady though her heart raced. For so many years she had carried the burden alone. Now, watching Alexander with their son, she saw something she hadn't dared to hope for: sincerity. As they ate, the silence filled not with tension but with something new, possibility. Leo's laughter bubbled out as Alexander pretended to burn his tongue on the stew. Elena's lips curved into a reluctant smile, the first in a long time. When the dishes were cleared, Alexander remained seated, his hands folded. He looked at Elena, his voice low but sure. "I can't change the past. I can only build what comes next, with both of you, if you'll let me." Elena's eyes shimmered. She saw the boy resting his head against his father's arm, already leaning into the presence he had longed for. She exhaled slowly, the years of pain loosening their grip. "We'll take it one day at a time," she whispered. Alexander nodded. "That's all I ask." Outside, snow drifted past the windows. The world softened under its weight. But inside, warmth spread through the modest apartment. Warmth not from wealth or power, but from the fragile mending of a family. The man who had once dined alone in luxury now found what money could never buy: love at the table, trust in the making, and the quiet glow of a new beginning. Sis.